Hey, it's Rachel Cooke, your modern mentor. I'm the founder of Lead Above Noise, a firm specializing in activating workplaces. We find your blind spots and opportunities, and we build you a custom blueprint to get your teams delivering their best work, efficiently, collaboratively, and with full engagement. So, let me ask you a question. How often and how intentionally are you asking questions at work? And yeah, I did that on purpose. Everyone I know right now is swimming in overwhelm. From senior executives to frontline individual contributors, everyone's calendars and to-do lists are the stuff of nightmares. And I'm seeing people respond largely in one of two ways. Some are just plowing through. They're burning candles at both ends, convinced that they won't catch fire. But spoiler alert, they will at some point. This approach isn't sustainable. So, what are the others doing? Well, it's 2024, so we seem to call it quiet vacationing. Though, if I'm honest, I have not figured out how this differs from 2023's quiet quitting trend. But it's that thing we do when we show up in body, but we kind of check out in spirit. We look like we're working, but mostly we're not. Also, this is not a great choice. So what is something that we can be doing to better manage this collective state we're in? There are lots of levers we can pull, but I think one of the most underutilized ones right now is just asking questions. More questions, better questions, intentional questions. Broadly speaking, I think there are 4 categories of questions that we can and should be asking, each in its own way positioned to pave a path towards just a little more ease. And you may be thinking, but I already ask lots of questions. And this may be true. But so many of the questions I hear around me are those of approval seeking. Do you agree? Or timeline checking. So, can I get this to you by Tuesday? These are questions to check a box rather than spark a dialogue. They are words concluding in question marks, but they're not really designed to achieve much. They are yes-no questions driving approval, but not challenging a rethink, an exploration. And these are what I would love for us to lean into. So let's talk about some other types of questions that we can all start practicing to help us achieve more impact rather than just chasing more volume. The first is questions to drive understanding. Okay, so one reason we are all so busy is that we're in such a hurry to act, to implement, and execute. And we don't always invest the time upfront to fully understand the what and why of a project. These questions will often begin with a why do we or why are we? I do a lot of work with teams around leading through change, and I was working recently with a client who wanted advice on building out their change scorecard so that after each change they could give themselves a score. When they brought me in, they had about a dozen possible metrics on the table, and they wanted my support in pulling it all together. Adam, the lead on the project, immediately started explaining each piece of data to me, where he'd pulled it from, what it represented, how they'd collect it going forward, and on and on. When he finally took a breath, I said, "Hey, Adam, what is the actual purpose of this scorecard that you're building?" And he looked at me puzzled and said, "Well, so when the change is over, we know how we did." And I said, "So if you did well, you get a pat on the back. And if you didn't, well, it's too late to change anything?" And then he said nothing. So I kept going. "Adam, I don't know if a scorecard is the thing you need here. It sounds like what would be more helpful would be a simple way of checking in with people during, not after the change. And if things are going well, you keep going. And if they aren't going well, you can change course while it still matters." I'm simplifying and summarizing here, but the point is that my one simple question unlocked the realization that he was hard at work on a scorecard that wasn't really solving anything, and the real solution he needed was so much simpler. So in your own battle with overwhelm, next time you find yourself gearing up for action, I want you to pause and ask yourself, is there a simple question I can ask of myself or of someone else that would help me understand something that in turn might help me to simplify this work? Next up is questions to trigger creativity. This is all about tapping our imagination before we move to action. These often begin with, what if we? Taking the time to ask these and making room for the most ridiculous answers can sometimes be the unlock we need. There's a story I've told before, but I love it so much, I'm bringing it back. It may be urban legend, but it serves a purpose. So there was this glass factory whose products were packaged in newspaper before being boxed and shipped. Management of this factory noticed their packaging productivity was super low. And in trying to figure out why, they discovered that their packers were getting distracted by the newspaper, stopping to read it before packing the glass in it. Management needed to solve this problem. So they invited their teams to ask what-if-we questions. The battier, the better. One team member said, well, what if we poke their eyes out so they couldn't read? Absurd as the idea was, it was the beginning of the solution that they ultimately landed on, which was establishing a partnership with a local nonprofit who helped blind citizens find jobs. Blind packers saved the day, and so did the questions of wonder. Next are the questions that help us reflect. Like with the understanding questions, reflection questions also require us to pause, this time after the implementation rather than before. These are the questions that help us learn more from our actions, the good and the bad. Questions like, how did that suit our needs and what would we change? What did we expect and what was the reality? What caused those differences? Did we actually solve the problem? And what will we do differently next time? Taking the time to really check the hindsight mirror on what we've done, to extract insight and learning, and to commit to implementing our answers moving forward will help us more effectively and efficiently as we proceed. And finally, there are the questions that honor our experience. Much as we want to focus on efficiency, return on investment, productivity, and results, all of which matter deeply, we cannot forget the human experience. Burnout doesn't just come from too much or too many. It can also be driven by a lack of purpose and connection. So taking the time to check in during and after a project with questions like, how did that feel? Did we have fun? Did we leave our community or our clients in a better place? And what would be exciting to try next time? Can deliver insights to help infuse more humanity and purpose and joy into our working days. I mean, who'd quit that job? Join me next week for another great episode. Until then, visit my website at leadabovenoise.com if your workplace could use an activation boost, a talk, a workshop, a blueprint, you choose. You can follow Modern Mentor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Find and follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for listening and have a successful week. Modern Mentor is a quick and dirty tips podcast. It's audio engineered by Dan Fauerbend. Our director of podcasts is Brandon Getchus. Our podcast and advertising operations specialist is Morgan Christensen. Our digital operations specialist is Holly Hutchings. And our marketing and publicity assistant is Davina Tomlin.